Conan the Barbarian. What is up, guys? Clearly, y'all have been wanting it, so we are doing plenty more Conan the Barbarian content for you. I hope you guys enjoyed the other videos I put out this week. The first one on Monday was about the pervasive invasion of AI into the Conan the Barbarian fan groups. It's just extreme. And the one I talked about on Wednesday was the possibility of what a Quentin Tarantino directed Conan the Barbarian film could look like. You guys can check those out on my channel. I'm sure you will enjoy them. But today we are doing the big one. Now, I've already made a video discussing the tragedy that was the 2011 Conan the Barbarian movie. It was absolutely horrendous. Today's video will not be quite so negative. That being said, often talking about Conan the Barbarian, we discuss the accuracy of adaptations and how closely they align with Robert E. Howard's writing. The subject of today's video does not necessarily align with Robert E. Howard's writing, but that is besides the point because it does happen to be the most impactful Conan the Barbarian title to the entire IP. And that is the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. This film is responsible largely for the mainstream popularity of Conan the Barbarian. Yes, of course, we had the Marvel Comics, which brought it into a level of popularity. And then before that, the originals, the Howard stories in the 30s, also brought Conan into popularity, but nothing did quite to the level of this movie. Now, I've got a lot to say about this film, and ultimately, it's a good movie. It really is, but it's not necessarily a good Conan the Barbarian movie. That being said, it's the best we've got. And so we're going to break it all down in this video. So be sure to stay tuned as I get into the good, the bad, and the okay, I guess maybe we could say. But first off, quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much, Austin Brown, Nate, and of course the latest one, Aaron, for your support on my Patreon. I hope you're enjoying the comic series. For the rest of you guys, if you subscribe for $3 a month, you'll get shout outs in every one of these videos, as well as issues of my comic series Hollow Point. It's kind of on a hiatus right now because I've got a lot going on, but I have been working on it, and I did just put out on the Patreon a short story written by me. It's about 37 pages or so. This is part one of my short story, Hollow Point Black Mesa, which is a prequel to the comic series. Now, I would not be surprised if a lot of you find this short story to be a lot better than the comic itself, because Hollow Point is the first comic I've ever made, whereas I've written a lot of literature, and so doing this short story is a little more up my alley, more my speed. That being said, I don't write a lot of short stories, so it's turning out to be a lot longer than I intended, and that is why I decided to just release part one as its own short story, and I'll release the rest in later parts. You guys can go and check that out on my Patreon. The link is in the description below. All right, Conan the Barbarian, 1982, directed by John Milius. Is it good? Well, as I've already stated, yes, it is objectively a good film. There's a lot of stuff that is great about this movie, but it's not quite Conan the Barbarian. It's not Robert E. Howard, Conan the Barbarian. Conan, the character himself, is very different. Even the world is a little different, but that being said, it does manage to capture the feel and atmosphere of the Hyborian Age, and that is the first great point that I'm going to be highlighting in this video, is the atmosphere. Now, this one has a little more of the sort of Asian Mongol inspiration and influence in terms of its aesthetic, which is really cool and works well with Conan, but it's not quite what we're used to thinking of or seeing in Conan. Really, we're more used to seeing that sort of Middle Eastern as he goes and travels, like some of the different cities in the Conan stories. You know, when I think of stories like People of the Black Circle, I really think of the Middle East as I'm reading it. That being said, later in the film, we do get a little more of this aesthetic as we're encountering Thulsa Doom and some of that stuff. But all in all, it really does capture that historic sort of fantasy feel. and I really love the overall dark fantasy vibe that is captured by this movie. It really is like the prime example of the dark fantasy aesthetic, aside from like Ridley Scott's Legend, which is, you know, really kind of the pinnacle of it. So the environment, the atmosphere, the aesthetic, that's all done extremely well. Some of the things that I have a little more criticism of are Conan, the character himself. Now, that being said, Conan in this movie is a great character. It's just not the Conan we're familiar with. It's not Howard's Conan. But John Milius, you know, there was some limitations because of Arnold Schwarzenegger and his thick accent and all of this. I guess he wanted, you know, he was worried about giving Conan too many lines because of the accent and the understandability of it. Now, that being said, Conan, even in the novels, I mean, in the stories, like, he does talk a decent amount. He has a lot more lines, but not to the degree of some of the characters we would think of in pop culture. So even the Howard Conan is still a man of few words. Now, that being said, when he does speak, it can often be long paragraphs of dialogue, and in this movie, Conan has very few words. He doesn't even speak for a long portion of the film, and then when he does speak, it's short and straight to the point. Now, what this does, although not replicating Howard's Conan, is it creates a very interesting, stoic, and somewhat intimidating character that seems to have a deep-set wisdom, even though he doesn't speak a lot. But of course, we know that people who are quiet and don't speak a lot often are perceived as wise. So through doing this, although it's not quite Howard's Conan, it still manages to keep the like feeling of wisdom and life experience that Howard's Conan has. Although the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan does have a little bit of a naivety to him for several parts of the movie, which makes sense, as in this movie, the story is that he was actually a slave after people came and wiped out his clan, his tribe, as he was a young kid. Then he was taken into slavery. So he really would be kind of naive in that regard. Now, this change in story, which makes Conan a slave for most of his life, like, I find it to be a little strange. It does work for the movie and it makes a good plot, but it just, I don't know. I like the traditional story of Conan better, where he was not a slave and he was in this tribe and, you know, barbarian tribe. I don't know. I just think the slave thing it always has felt a little weird to me, but nonetheless, it does make for a good movie. Now, originally this film apparently was written by somebody who was trying to take Conan and turn it into a post-apocalyptic future. I'm so glad that did not happen. I'm glad John Milius took over and made something that somewhat resembles the Hyborian Age that we know. That just feels a lot better. It would have felt so sacrilegious to take this story and then say it's a post-apocalyptic future like Mad Max. That would have been crazy. Obviously, the vibe of the film, the 80s feel and everything, it would make sense for it to be kind of like Mad Max, but it wouldn't feel right for that to be Conan. Now, I gotta say, I was born in the 90s, so, you know, I didn't get to experience the 80s, but my God, the 80s had to have been a time to be alive. Like, my favorite music, many of my favorite movies, they all come from the 80s, and overall, I just think the 80s seems like such a badass time period. You know, it's like fire everywhere and guitars and like just badass, like muscles and just badass stuff. You know, I feel like we've gotten so like lame and soft. I know what some of you are thinking, you know, you go look at hair metal and you got dudes dressed like girls and it's kind of goofy. Look, I agree. However, overall, the 80s had like the best action movies with the best action heroes. Like, even the girly hair metal bands made awesome music with like electric guitars and just is so good. And I just think it was so badass, you know, like since that time, one of the things I don't understand, like, you know, and I believe this was Arnold Schwarzenegger's first acting role. So I got to give him props right there, because I think that his acting was quite good for being a first role. But at the time, you know, bodybuilding and working out and all this stuff, it was pretty popular back then. Today, it's like this has completely gone out the door. There is a resurgence among Gen Z to try and like get to the gym and be healthy and all this, which is great to see. But like, what happened to dudes just wanting to be ripped? You know, that was awesome. Like I said, I think there is a little bit of a resurgence of that, but through the 90s and the early 2000s and 2010s, it's like people were not interested in this at all. It was just people wanted to sit at home and play video games and be little scrawny dudes. I look, and if that's you, that's fine. I'm just saying I'm surprised that people don't seem to be interested in this anymore. It almost became like a cringy thing to people to like want to go to the gym and get buff. I just don't understand that at all. I mean, buff is literally in my last name, so maybe that's why I have an interest in it. But I also just think it's awesome. Like, why would you not want to be like a muscular dude? I just think that seems so cool. But besides the point, let's get back to talking about the movie. That's a little side tangent. The acting overall is pretty good. And especially when compared to films of today, the acting seems incredible because acting today has gotten so ridiculous. It's so over dramatized and unrealistic feeling. You watch any of these modern Netflix shows or a lot of these movies, and you know, there's a few good ones out there, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, acting has turned into this really strange, unrealistic, like overly dramatized sort of thing. Anytime anyone does anything, everyone has to react in this big way. Back in the 80s, and like Conan the Barbarian is an example of this, it's not like that. And often, you know, there's times when we see Conan just like gazing into the distance solemnly, not speaking, and that's his reaction to something. And you know what? That's more realistic because people in real life often react to things this way. Oftentimes, people don't do these big over-the-top reactions that we see in modern films, and especially in anime. Oh my God, it's ridiculous in anime shows. I can't stand it. So the acting overall is good. Now, the side characters I don't care for so much, like Valeria and the wizard guy and the other guy. They're okay, and I will say they're a lot better than the side characters in Conan the Destroyer, but still, I'm like, you know, I could have enjoyed this movie like really without any of them. Maybe Valeria is important, you know, because she plays a role in the story and stuff, and obviously the wizard, he kind of like, he brings Conan back to life. Spoiler alert, but this is a movie from the 80s. I'm sure you guys have seen it by now. But just the running around with the band of heroes thing, I don't think we needed that. I think Conan, you know, could have had interactions with these characters and, you know, having the wizard resurrect him and things like this. Like, that's part of the plot, but I don't think we need the band of heroes running around like it's Dungeons and Dragons. That's just me. Maybe I would feel differently if they were like better characters, in my opinion, but I don't know. I just think this film could have worked with just the lone hero rather than a band of heroes. Overall, the story is quite good. It's a lot of creative liberties taken here where John Milius, he seems to have been a fan of Robert E. Howard to a degree, and he definitely took a lot of elements from Robert E. Howard's writing, but kind of like combined them into this big hodgepodge of a story. You know, Thulsa Doom is really more so a character in like the Cole stories, not really Conan, but he took that and put Thulsa Doom in here. And huge highlight is James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom. Excellent acting, like just an incredible performance. He delivers some really powerful lines in his voice. I love when he's standing on top of the pyramid thing and his voice just carries as he says stuff. Like, it's on par with Darth Vader, to be honest. It's really good. But the story overall, like, it's a good story. Like I said, it's different than Howard's Conan, but it has enough nods to that it still feels like Howard's Conan while being a different story. You know what I mean? Like, I could see, for example, if Robert E. Howard just scratched all of the stuff he'd written and decided to make one Conan story, I could see him writing something like this movie, but, you know, his stories are still better than this movie. But John Milius, it seems he pulled different elements. I think the princess towards the end, I think her name is Yasmina, which is like the Devi woman from the People Battle of the Black Circle. And there's, you know, different things like that, which are pretty cool. One of the best parts of this movie easily is the soundtrack. It's just, without that, I mean, that soundtrack is so good and it just hypes me up. And I'm like, yeah, let's go on an adventure. This soundtrack really makes the movie, and that's about all there is to be said about that. The soundtrack's great. I also really like the majority of the special effects. There's something about these effects that, I'll give an example. The part where Conan is dead and the wizard is trying to bring him back and the spirits come. This way of doing special effects, I don't exactly know what they're doing here or how it works, but it's like a very old method that it doesn't seem like was used very much in film. And it's really cool. It gives an effect that, in my opinion, almost looks quite a bit better than a lot of the modern CGI. And it's especially done well in this instance with the spirits and stuff. I just thought that looked so cool. And I know in The Destroyer, they do it with some of the magic and stuff, and it looks really cool in that too. I like it a lot. There's something about it that, like, it looks a little rough and a little edgy, and something about that makes it almost a little more believable than modern CGI. It looks cool. But that being said, there are some pretty bad effects too. Like, I know in some ways I like the part where Thulsa Doom transforms into the snake. It's kind of cool, and it's like an almost seamless transition, which is impressive. But the snake part itself, like, just looks kind of goofy. I also thought the part where he turns a snake into an arrow was really dumb. That part I don't care for so much. But for the most part, the effects are really good. When Conan goes and finds that, like, demon succubus witch lady and is having intercourse with her and she turns into this demon, like, that part looked really good as well. So, I mean, all in all, lots of good stuff about this movie. You know, the Atlantean sword is very cool. Thulsa Doom is very cool. And the Titan comics, the new comic series, they actually have some nods to these. Like, we actually see the Atlantean sword in the Titan comics with Cole, and Thulsa Doom in these comics, when they show the flashbacks of his past, his aesthetically looks a lot more like the Thulsa Doom from these movies. So it seemed that Titan Comics, Jim Zub, and the artists, like, they really wanted to give, like, a nod to this movie, which makes sense, because this movie's responsible for a lot of the popularity behind Conan. That being said, what are the bad things about the movie? Well, number one, I think the worst part about the movie is the sound effects. And I'm going to cut them a little slack, because my guess is that a lot of the action movie sound effects that we're used to hearing today maybe weren't really developed or figured out at that period of time. I could be wrong about that, but that's sort of my guess. Also, those sound effects that we're used to today in action movies, they're not realistic at all. That's not how things really sound. That being said, it makes it sound good, and it adds to the visuals. If you don't believe me, just watch a modern action movie without the sound, and you'll see just how much work the sound effects are doing. So for this movie, I really would like to see a version of it where people add new sound effects to it. Like, I want the swords to go like shing, ching, even though that's not super realistic in the way that they sound, but I like it, and it's ingrained in my head because it's become a cultural staple of film, is that's what a sword sounds like, you know? Shing! Instead, Conan goes and cuts somebody, and it sounds like he's smacking them. In many ways, this might be a more realistic sound effect, but I prefer to hear the ching, like that. I don't know. That's just me. Maybe you guys don't agree, but that's my opinion. I also think that the movie is just a little bit too slow. Now, that being said, before you get mad, there is some good in this. Like, a lot of films today are just bam, 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 bam at breakneck speed, and they don't let anything breathe, and it's honestly terrible. You go watch a modern Marvel movie, I'll give you an example. I remember loving Doctor Strange when it came out, and then I just recently watched it again, and I couldn't stand how within the span of like 30 minutes, he goes from this place to this place. Now he's in the other end of the world, and now he's a master of magic all of a sudden, comes out of nowhere. So older movies, they let things breathe, they're slower, and this helps to make you more immersed and makes it more believable. If a modern audience of the young generation went to watch Conan the Barbarian 1982, they would really struggle to get through this movie because there are so many just slow parts. It's not as bad as some other old films in terms of the pacing, but there is a lot of slowness in the movie. I would just speed it up just a little bit. It doesn't need to be a ton because I think it's pretty good how it is, but it's just a little too slow. That's really all I've got for the negatives. It really is a great movie, but ultimately the sound effects could be a little better. The pacing could be just slightly better, and it's not Robert E. Howard, but it is similar to Robert E. Howard. And because of that, this is the best Conan the Barbarian movie we have. Perhaps it's the best we will ever have because it doesn't seem like any of these directors or film companies have any desire to make a Conan movie that is true to Robert E. Howard. And I would rather they never make another one than to make another terrible one. This movie is great as a standalone film. If you know nothing about Conan the Barbarian and you're just going to see this film or putting it in or turning on the streaming service, whatever they do today, you'll probably enjoy it. You'll probably like it quite a bit. But if you're a Conan fan and you watch it, you might feel a little differently. And that's where I'm coming from. I saw this movie for the first time a while back before I had ever read any Robert E. Howard or even any Conan comics or stories or anything. And I loved it. I thought it was a great movie. Then I became a Conan fan. I started reading the Robert E. Howard stories, reading the comics and all this stuff. And then I just watched this movie again for this video. And I was like, okay, I feel a little differently about it now because I'm so ingrained in the Robert E. Howard Conan that I want this movie to feel like that. But it just is a different thing, and you just have to accept it for the fact that it's a different thing. The movie is rated R, I believe, and it shows lots of boobs. It's a little violent, but it's not quite there. Now, it's fine the way it is, but here's the thing. If you're gonna make, it doesn't feel like an R-rated movie. I guess that's the way I'll put it. It feels like maybe a PG to PG-13 film that has boobs and some blood. That's what it feels like. Because of that, I think they could have just not shown any boobs at all. Obviously, they did because at the time it was popular to just show boobs and everything. And obviously, a little bit of nudity is very kind of a part of Conan in general, so it makes sense to be in there. But if you're gonna make a essentially PG or PG-13 movie that just has boobs in it, why not just cover the boobs up and make it PG or PG-13? Or even better, go all the way into the R rating and make this truly violent and brutal. Because the film, while having some violent elements to it, is not quite brutal in my opinion. In fact, I think if you covered up the boobs, I don't think anyone would have a problem with this movie being PG-13. So they could have pushed it just a little further to make it truly savage and brutal, and that might have made the R rating make a lot more sense and maybe even felt a little more like Conan, but it's really just a PG or PG-13 movie that shows boobs. That's my take on that. All in all, great film. Be sure to watch it if you haven't already, but most of you guys tuning into this, I'm almost positive that you've all watched it probably several times. Now, if you're a longtime Conan fan, you've probably already read all of the Robert E. Howard stories. Maybe you've read some of the later Conan writings by other authors already, and you want something new to read that gives you that feel of Conan the Barbarian, but maybe something a little fresh. Be sure to click the link in the description below to head on over to Amazon and get a copy of my novel Wrath of Torak. This is a sword and sorcery tale, very much like Conan in vibe, but it's an original story in my own made-up fantasy world, and he's his own character. He has similarities to Conan, but he's his own character, and I think this would be some great new reading for you if you're a fan of Conan and you want something fresh. So be sure to check that out. Aside from that, guys, that's all I've got. So if you're a fan of Conan the Barbarian, buy Crom, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and there will be plenty more Conan videos coming out on this channel for you to enjoy. See you guys in the next video.